It's now live.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Control Committee, 31st of March. Apologies for absence. I have an apology for absence have been received from Councillor Val Bryant. Are there any further apologies? Thank you. Item 2 are the minutes for the 27th of January and the 24th of February 2022. I propose we take as read and approve as a true record of proceedings the minutes of the meeting on the 27th of January 2022 and the 24th of February 2022. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Boxham, thank you very much. Members, are there any comments on the minutes? No, that's fine. Louis, we'll go to the vote, please.
That motion is carried.
Thank you. And notification of any other business? I have none. Chair's announcements. Firstly, audio recording. In accordance with council policy, this meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recordings will be available to view on ModGov and the film recording via the NHDC YouTube channel. 2, declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and the speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. And thirdly, to clarify matters for registered speakers, members of the public have 5 minutes for each group of speakers. That is 5 minutes for objectors and 5 minutes for supporters. This 5-minute time limit also applies to member advocates. We will aim to take a break at 9 p.m. or at a suitable point thereabouts if it seems necessary. I'd like to welcome Councillor Raj Bakar to her first planning meeting, as well as Councillor Simon Bloxham, who has become a full committee member after filling in for Councillor John Bishop. Welcome. Now, public participation. Can I confirm the following registered speakers are in attendance? Philip Crowe, Max Good, Margaret Trinder, Councillor Claire Strong, Ben Borthwick, Philip Hills, Councillor Steve Jarvis, James Clark, and Samantha Boyd. Good evening and welcome to you all. We move on to item 6, which is land at Turnpike Lane and adjacent to 4 Manor Close in Ickleford. Could I call upon Anne MacDonald to present?
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, everyone. I have no updates to report on this meeting, on this item. Can I have the first slide, please? Who's doing the slides? Oh, it's on. Next slide, please. Can you all hear me? Is the mic picking me up? Yeah. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide again, please. Thank you. This proposed site layout. I've got an update to present on this item tonight. This application has been called in by Councillor Sam North. I'm sure members are aware that this application came before committee last year and was refused by the committee members and then was allowed at appeal. This application is seeking to vary the scheme that was approved at appeal, and the changes are relatively minor and are set out in paragraph 4.2.1 of the report. I'll just read them out quickly for ease. It's to increase the ridge heights of the houses in plots 1 to 4, which is the row of houses, by 0.2 metres. It's to increase the depth of the footprint of the houses, with the larger house completely in plot 4, which is the bottom left-hand house. It's to add an extra bedroom with an ensuite to each of the dwellings in the loft space. It's to add Velux roof lights and gable end windows to the dwellings. It's the alteration of the parking layout for plot 4, with parking now proposed on plot, and it's to vary the wording of some of the conditions. I've got no objection to these changes. The additional increase in the ridge height is considered to be minor and is not a material addition to the layout, to the appearance of the houses, and the same with the extra depth of the floor space. Regarding the addition of the bedroom at the loft space, the fallback position to take into account with this application is the scheme that's approved at appeal did not restrict permitted development rights. So whereas my officer report had recommended the removal of permitted development rights, when the scheme was approved at appeal, that condition was not imposed. So that means that these houses, if they're built under the scheme that's been approved, they could, without planning permission, put in dormer windows and use the loft space already without needing planning permission. As a result of this application tonight, I'm recommending that permitted development rights are restricted. So whilst these houses will have Velux roof lights and gable end windows and be slightly taller in 4 of them, the right to remove dormer windows or ground floor extensions and garden outbuildings without the grant of planning permission has been restricted. And the application is then recommended for conditional permission. There's a few more slides to go through to give a bit more context. Can I have the next slide, please? So that just shows one of the houses, how it's going to look with the addition of the roof lights. Next slide, please. And that's the other, that's the street scene elevation. I think that's the last slide. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Have any members have any questions of Anne? Okay. Therefore, oh, sorry, Tom.
Yeah, just a quick one. And could you just explain a bit about the permitted development rights and what happened at the appeal? So you were saying that they were restricted at the time in the original recommendation.
The officer report that went before committee, one of the conditions imposed on that report was to remove permitted development rights for ground floor extensions, loft extensions and garden outbuildings. When the scheme was approved at appeal, that condition was not imposed, so that right was not taken away. So if the scheme that's been permitted at appeal is built, those houses could basically do what was in front of you tonight without planning permission. So we call that the fallback position because we obviously had to take that into account. The decision that's in front of members tonight has now got the condition to remove PD rights on this new decision. So if this is granted, this right then is taken away. So whilst they will be able to use this loft space with the Velux roof lights, they would not be able to put in dormer windows without planning permission.
Okay, Tom.
Yes, I just to follow up, is that standard? Does that happen automatically at the appeal stage if that the permitted development rights which were withheld then get reinstated?
It seems to be quite common, yes,
okay.
Actually.
Thank you.
Can I therefore welcome Philip Crowe to address the committee? Can I remind you, Philip, that you have 5 minutes? And I'll remind you with a minute to go in case there's a problem.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Philip Crowe, representing Ickleford Parish Council tonight to reiterate the objections already put forward by the Parish Council and to support the residents affected by this development. This piece of land has always been designated as Green Belt, where policy 2 of the Council's safe policies would apply. It is only since the expectation of the emerging local plan that designates this land as green belt that it has now, for the convenience of development, been redesignated as white. However, it does not alter the fact that with the revised planning application, this development will almost certainly have visual and irretrievable privacy impact on not only its surrounding neighbours, but will also detract from the village scene, being situated very close to the adjoining conservation area and heritage surroundings. This development will have no impact whatsoever on our current housing needs, as it must be remembered that the new modified designs, which are totally unacceptable, benefit only those members of the public who are either looking to downsize from much larger properties or are looking for a place in the country, bearing in mind their work probably takes them each day back to the city. Since 2016, Ickleford has undergone many changes with new developments, which, although in some cases objected to, have sprung up like weeds, namely the Green Man development of 8 houses and the 19 houses in Turnpike Lane. But none to date have caused as much heartfelt anguish as this development is doing to its neighbours, with their prospect in losing their privacy through bad design, positioning and lack of thought. The applicant's original revised proposal was for two 2-bedroom units, 2 3-bedroom units and 1 4-bedroom unit, which is compliant with emergency policy HS3, beg your pardon. Why then, after gaining approval by the government inspector that the development should not be delayed, has the applicant now moved the goalposts and put forward a new revised planning application to not only increase the houses to 4 4-bedroom units and 1 3-bedroom unit, but has also altered the total house design to include a bedroom in the now heightened roof line, to include Velox windows that will totally invade the privacy of the surrounding houses. Along with all our previous objections to this development relating to parking, increased traffic, insufficient thought for pedestrians, Ickleford's poor sewerage and wastewater structure, and most of all privacy to local residents, all will now increase with these larger and more accommodating houses, bringing about more people, more cars, more movement of pedestrians and more waste. It is therefore our considered opinion, Mr. Chairman, that this applicant's revised planning application should be refused, not only because of its latest and inconsiderate poor design, but more importantly, because this particular development, if the application is approved, will bring nothing to the council's need for housing, and more importantly, nothing to the village of Ickleford and its future housing needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowe. Members, have you any questions of clarification for Mr. Crowe? No, in that case, then I'll move on to Mr. James Clark to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. I would like to respond to a number of the objections that have been outlined in the committee report in paragraphs 3.3 up to 3.5. I'll start with some of the Ickleford Parish Council concerns. So first and foremost, there's a concern that increased height would bring about privacy challenges, and there's been a suggestion that roof lights will do this. There are none of the plots 1 to 4 are within 20 metres of an adjacent neighbouring window. This is pretty standard for what is considered to be an invasion of privacy. And while plot 5 is close to some of the properties on Manor Close, to consider roof lights an invasion of privacy is not generally considered planning practice. In terms of affordable housing and housing needs, there's been concern that there are none. Well, affordable housing doesn't actually kick in until 10 units or more constituting a major scheme. In terms of housing need, well, this would bring 5 family-sized homes to the market, which in itself is quite useful for affordable housing, in the sense that people who are currently living in three beds can then move up the housing market to a 4-bed. And this will actually, in some ways, prevent a lot of the extensions you see now to three-bed homes, where they completely get extended beyond their means. In terms of the insufficient car parking, the level of parking meets this parking SPD, and no objection has been raised by the Highway Authority. Equally, in terms of the road and walking hazards, the Highway Authority have made no objection to the exit and have added some conditions. In terms of a new arboricultural assessment, well, a new arboricultural report and landscape plan were submitted as part of this section 73 and have been accepted by officers. In terms of drainage and runoff clarification, the new plan actually improves this, where we've removed an area of hard standing, which is now going to be rain gardens. And in terms of the heights, as mentioned by the officer, the additional ridgeline height is 200 millimeters, which is less than a standard ruler. So it's essentially de minimis. I'd also like to bring your attention to paragraph 14, which is in Appendix 1 of the appeal decision from last year, where the inspector stated, a number of interested parties, including local residents, have also expressed a wide range of concerns, including, but not limited to the following: the council's housing strategy as proposed in the emerging LP, ecology, biodiversity, security, safety, highways, pedestrian safety, drainage, trees, and archaeology, amongst other things. Additionally, I note the comments on the planning application from elected members, Ickleford Parish Council, and Campaign to Protect Rural England. However, I note these matters were considered where relevant by council at the application stage and did not form part of the reason for refusal, which I have dealt with in the assessment above. Lastly, he states, while I can understand the concerns of the interested parties, there is no compelling evidence before me that would lead me to come to a different conclusion on the council on these matters. I would lastly like to say the housing delivery test of last year in North Hertfordshire meant that only 49% of the target was being met. Therefore, the council remains in presumption of favour of sustainable development, therefore its plans are out of date. And as stated in the report, there's only a 1.4 year housing supply versus the expectation of 5. I'd just like to finally end by stating that my client does empathize with the local residents. They do not wish to create a development which is harmful. I fully understand that at the moment the site is open and residents locally have had this for many years. However, the additional 5 quality family housing will only add to the area and allow people to move up within the housing market. I would like and request that councillors approve this tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Members, have you any questions of clarification for Mr. Clark? No? Okay. Can I ask Anne McDonald if she needs to respond to any of the points raised?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have any points to add. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Therefore, can I throw this open to debate? Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if I could seek some clarification either from Anne or legal officer on the status of the application for clarity. This is a Section 76 application. It has already received permission from the inspector via the appeal. So planning permission is granted on this site for the 5 dwellings. What we are considering tonight is not the application as a whole, is it, but the variation on these particular conditions. That's the only thing we consider tonight. Planning permission exists, so we can't overturn that planning permission as it's an inspector's decision, and that can only be overturned by the High Court, I believe.
Sorry, that is correct. It is a 73 application.
Have we any more comments from anybody? Councillor Morgan Derbyshire.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think I probably was the only councillor that voted in favour of this the first time it came to this committee, so I'm happy to propose.
Just for clarification, if this were refused, then the existing permission would be able to be implemented. Am I correct? Thank you.
So Tony Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just about to state exactly what Councillor Mantle's just said. The situation is we threw it out last time round because we felt it was inappropriate development within the Greenbelt. The inspector's made his decision over that matter. So I'll second Mr. Councillor Derbyshire's recommendation to grant.
Thank you, Councillor Hunter. As nobody else requires to speak, we have received a recommendation from Councillor Morgan to pass this application with a seconder from Councillor Tony Hunter. Can we therefore go to the vote, please? That is passed. And we move on to item 7, the new barn, Great North Road, Radwell, Baldock, Hertfordshire. Once again, Anne MacDonald to present.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I have the first slide, please? Next slide, please. Thank you. I've got no updates to report on this item. This application has been presented to committee tonight due to the size of the site area, which means it has to come before you tonight in accordance with the scheme of delegation. This site has a unique position surrounded by roads, which you can see here, the A1 to one side, the Great North Road to the other, and the slip road to the Baldock service station on the north side. This means that whilst this site is in the rural area, it doesn't have a sort of classically countryside location or feel. The land is not undeveloped countryside, and there's a long planning history for the site, and the ground area across the site has a lot of rubble across the surface. Can I have the next slide, please? This shows an aerial picture of what I was just talking about, and obviously another site location plan. The vehicle access into the site is at the bottom of the site with the access off the Great North Road. The 2 existing buildings on the site are to be retained and to be reused. And then the application is seeking to hard surface the vast majority of the land area and to use it for open storage as a building's builder's yard. The materials will be stacked in up to 3 metre high blocks. They obviously won't be permanent structures. They'll be coming and going depending on supply and demand. Next slide, please. This shows the buildings to be retained and the existing access. The existing access is to be retained and widened slightly to allow 2-way traffic. Next slide, please. This slide is of more sort of clarity for the application. The yellow line around this site area shows the additional landscaping bund that's to be put in. So the site's proposing to put a 6 metre deep landscaping strip all around that area, which obviously will have the benefit of A, screening the site, and B, looking much better from the roads. You can see a sort of diagram with that halfway down the left-hand side. The 2 sort of main visual elements of the site, so to speak, that will be seen from the outside is the new gate and the new fencing. Both are 2.4 metres in height. The fencing will be significantly screened in views from the landscaping. The gate will be visible across the entrance because clearly it's a clear view from the Great North Road. However, I don't feel that it is harmful to the locality due to the setback from the road, the fact that the gate's not a solid structure that can be seen in the images. And I don't feel that the visual impact of that gate seen the distance setback from the road and the fact that people be passing by at relatively speed along there would be so sufficiently visually harmful to the locality to justify the refusal of the application for that reason. Next slide, please. That shows in a bit more detail the additional landscape buffer. The curb line obviously is existing plot boundary line. So the sort of area to the right-hand side, left-hand side from where you're looking at it, of the plot boundary line shows the new planted area. Next slide, please. I think that's the final slide. Thank you very much, Chair. And this application is recommended for conditional permission. Oh, sorry, there's a few more slides. That just shows a visual of the site as existing. Next slide, please. This shows within the site to show that the land has been churned up and used, and obviously contains sections of rubble and this sort of undeveloped countryside. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Am I right in assuming that there's a company actually on that site at the moment that supplies artificial grass?
I believe they've vacated the site and it's currently vacant.
Okay, thank you. Members, have you any questions for Anne for clarification? No. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you. Just a bit of clarification. The new entrance gates, I'm assuming from the drawings and that they're set far enough back from the highway to allow a vehicle to wait their large lorry or something to pull up to them without intruding onto the highway if the gates were shut.
Yes, that's correct. The actual, if you go back to one of the slides, the gates are actually set in the bottom of the site, and the access off the Great North Road is several metres. I think it's probably about, well, to guess it's probably about 7 or 8 metres from the Great North Road up to the gate. So that's, as a minimum, it's quite a distance.
Thank you. Can I therefore invite Max Good to address the committee?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members of the Planning Committee. This planning application seeks to create a high-quality premises, allowing the relocation of a highly successful construction company to the district on this generally poor-quality, quasi-industrial island site. The applicant, Carey London Limited, support the wider construction industry throughout the southeast of England through their expertise in structural construction, working alongside the biggest names in construction and regeneration. At their current site in St Albans, Carey London Limited are a significant contributor to the local economy through local jobs and on construction sites throughout the southeast. The applicant has outgrown their current premises, and to support their continued growth and contribution to the construction industry and local economy, the applicant has undertaken a substantial exercise to identify appropriate alternative sites for their relocation, which has resulted in the submission of this planning application. This planning application follows over 2 years of engagement with officers at the Council and the County Council in order to deliver a proposal that assists in meeting the aims of the Council's economic recovery and long-term growth following the COVID-19 pandemic. The site itself has a complex planning history, which has resulted in a piecemeal approach to development. The site was intensively used for the processing of animal feeds by Radwell Animal Feeds until the site was then identified by Hertfordshire County Council as being suitable for a new waste and recycling facility. The site was used for this purpose, for the purpose of storing and sorting recycling waste until Veolia vacated the site between 2013 and 2015. Since this date, the site has been used for a host of different uses, resulting in the general poor quality island site that currently exists. The District Council is committed to encouraging the growth of new and established businesses and to attract inward investment to the district. In light of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, opportunities to attract successful businesses such as Carey London Limited to the district should be embraced. This position is reiterated by the County Council, who in particular acknowledge the construction sector as being critical in driving forward economic recovery and the longer-term growth within Hertfordshire. The emphasis on supporting the economy and its recovery has been made clear within local and regional policy documents and announcements, as well as government announcements throughout the pandemic. Carey London Limited is a significant part of the UK construction industry, acting as delivery partners for multinational property developers, smaller independent developers, and all in between. They are highly respected in the industry and recognised as consistently delivering high-quality services to their partners. The ongoing demand for the services that Carey London Limited offer has resulted in the need to expand and look for alternative sites to base their services. This increased space is vital to their operations and their role in the delivery of much-needed new homes and commercial development throughout the UK generally, but even more so in light of the current economic position the UK finds itself in. This island site, surrounded by major infrastructure, is an ideal base for Carey London Limited, as it has a long history of highly intensive uses and excellent access to the national highways network. The major economic benefits that the relocation of Carey London Limited will bring to North Hertfordshire and the wider area are evident in their workload and their need to expand. The needs of successful companies such as this and their role in the economic recovery that construction can play should be supported by councils as a major public benefit. The application is supported by a full suite of technical documents and has attracted no objections from the public or statutory consultees. It is for these reasons that the application being heard before you tonight should be considered in a positive light and planning permission be granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Good. Members, have you any questions or clarification for Mr. Good? Councillor Tyson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to ask if the applicant can guarantee that the site's going to be used not just as a base for plant and materials, which will be sort of moved up and down from this location to St Albans and then to their building sites in London, which is where they seem to have most of their operations. So is it really going to be a benefit to North Herts to have this site here? Or is it just going to be a convenient overflow site where they can leave their diggers and spare materials that they can't fit into the site in St Albans?
Would you like to answer that, Mr. Good?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you for the question. The applicant is seeking to leave their current site, which is due to their continued growth and their successful business. They require a larger site to make sure that that continued growth can be sustained. And by relocating to North Hertfordshire, I do believe that is a public benefit to the district.
Does that answer your question, Tom? Okay. Can I ask Anne MacDonald if there's anything she needs to respond to, any points raised?
Thank you, Chairman. I've got nothing I wish to add. Thank you.
In that case, members, I'll put it out for debate. Councillor Morgan Derbyshire.
Happy to propose, Chairman, as per officers' recommendations.
Councillor Tom Tyson.
Yeah, could I just say a word on behalf of the Radwell Village meeting? They just had a request that if this is approved, and I wouldn't stand in the way of that, but is it possible to ensure that there is adequate signage to the site, because there is a history of trucks missing that entrance and going down Radwell Lane, and there is literally nowhere to turn around once you're in there, and they've had some awkward experiences with large lorries finding their way down to the lake at the bottom of Radwell Lane. So they've just asked if we could ensure that maybe if it's possible to condition that, I don't know, that there's a proper sign to show where the actual entrance is.
We can pose an informative to that effect. I can see the applicant's agent is nodding in the background. The only thing I'd be slightly cautious is that some signage may require advertisement consent in its own right, depending where it's cited and the size of it and the size of the lettering. So I'd be cautious of imposing a condition tonight to sort of give carte blanche to something that might need consent in its own right. But we can definitely add an informative decision notice saying that we would like an application for signage to come in. Thank you.
Councillor Ian Mantle.
Into second Councillor Derbyshire's proposal.
Right. We have a proposer and a seconder. Therefore, can we take that to the vote, please? Obviously, including the informative that Councillor Tyson has asked for.
That motion is carried.
We therefore move on to item 8, the land at Hatchpen Farm, the joint Reed, Royston. Once again, Anne, it's down to you to present this item.
Thank you, Chairman. I've actually got one update on this item now, following a query raised at members' briefing earlier today. The question was asked whether what would happen to the excavated soil, and the planning agent has confirmed that the soil that's to be excavated is to be retained within the farm holding and used elsewhere within the vicinity of the new agricultural building, but will not result in significant change to levels within the wider farm holding that in itself would then require planning permission. Thank you. So this application is for, can I have the first slide, please? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. That's it, thank you. This application is for sort of quite significant extensions to the farmyard at Hatchpen Farm in Reed. This farm lies to the farmyard lies on the north side of the joint, which I'm sure members are aware is a particularly attractive part of the countryside in North Herts. This application is also for you tonight, members, due to the site of the size area. The farm is seeking to increase the farmyard area to provide 2 new buildings for storage of straw and 1 dedicated machinery store and repair building. I've got quite a few slides this one, so I'll try and talk you through them. Obviously the red box is to indicate the area of the new buildings. Next slide, please. This shows the location of the 3 new buildings. So buildings A and B are open-sided straw barns. Building C is to be an enclosed building, which will be the machinery store and repair centre. Next slide, please. That's a diagram of the open side building. Next slide, please. That's a diagram of the enclosed building showing roller shutter doors in one elevation. Next slide, please. The interesting thing with this application is the land levels. I'm sure members know this part of the site is quite hilly. This shows the contours dropping down across the land. Next slide, please. And this shows how the land is to be excavated out. So the dotted line is obviously current land level, and the dark line coming down across is the excavated level, which you can see is quite significantly changed. The benefit of this is that it means the buildings will be dropped down into the landscape. The existing Hatchpen farmyard was excavated quite substantially and built at a low point, so that in views you really cannot see the quite significantly sized farmyard area. And it's quite successfully screened by landscaping. And this application is proposing the same. It doesn't come down quite as steeply as the land level as the existing farmyard, which you can see in the top diagram. You can see the 10-metre yard level of the existing farmyard. But the buildings proposed are not quite as tall as the existing buildings in the existing farmyard. So they're actually about 2 metres lower in height than the tallest buildings that are on the site as existing. Next slide, please. That shows how the buildings will sit alongside the existing farmyard. There's an existing farm track that's not going to be dug up, that's to be retained as a useful farm track running between the 2 areas. And the landscaping belt will be going around the building on 2 sides. On the north side, there's already well-established planting on that white area to the north. So in sort of views going south, the buildings will be screened already. Next slide, please. So this shows the farmyard. This is taken just off the joint, and actually where the land drops, you can obviously can't see the existing farmyard buildings. Next slide. This is slightly further along the same access track into Hatchpen. You can see the existing farmyard buildings, and obviously the area of land we're talking about is just in front of the existing building. You can see the silos. They'll be sort of in line with the building in front of that. Next slide, please. It's slightly close up of the area. Next slide, please. This shows the existing field taken from the other side. So the trees in the top left are the back trees behind the existing buildings, and you can see how the land falls in this location. Next slide, please. This is looking from the farm track that's to be retained, looking back up to the site from the other side. So it's the area of land just above the existing hedge line. Next slide, please. Thank you. There's policy support for farm expansion and diversification. The farm has set out why the additional storage is needed it's sort of meet their farming requirements. In essence, they had a deal pre-Brexit where they used to sell their straw to Ireland for the mushroom farming, and then following Brexit they've not been able to do this and now using it for biogen, but there's quite strict regulations over moisture content in the straw bales. So the aim of these buildings is basically to prevent waste really from the farm, and it's to allow the straw to then be used in biogen, which is supported in planning policies. Rural diversification in rural areas is supported through the MPAPF and our own planning policies, and the application is recommended for conditional permission. Thank you.
Members, have you any questions of Anne MacDonald? Councillor Moody.
Just looking at the buildings that are already established, they've got solar panels on. Is there any plans to put solar panels on these buildings at all?
Not shown in the application, no.
Okay, thank you.
Right, we have no registered speakers for this item. Sorry. Councillor Hunter.
Sorry, Chairman, there's obviously a delay before it gets to you.
Yep, it's my brain, don't worry.
Okay. I just wanted to check with our officer, reference the landscaping from the joint. I read in here it's got to be implemented by a certain date, etc. Are you happy that will actually do what's been successful with the ground levels at the moment, and also the further ground level reduction, that it won't be sort of because they are quite large buildings, it won't be on the horizon, so to speak, when you're standing on the joint?
Thank you, Councillor. If we go back to the slide that I took to begin with the view from the joint, they definitely won't be in view because the existing buildings aren't. And these buildings are sort of 2 metres lower than the highest point of the existing buildings. So you won't be able to see them in the main view from the joint above Reed. Obviously, down the Barkway Road, I think there are glimpses across, and I think some further around the backside from the Newsall side, there are glimpses of the roofs, and that's why the landscaping on those two sides will be quite key in screening it off. I know the Rand family farmers are quite particular in how their farm appears. They want it to be screened, they want it to look nice, and I've got no hesitation, and I believe they will implement those landscaping conditions because they live on the farm themselves. They want it to look nice themselves.
Is there anybody else required to speak? No? I mean, I'll open it for debate, but I assume nobody's got anything to say now. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. This is a farm on an industrial scale. It's a huge farm, the area around it. The buildings, I hadn't realised till I seen the aerial pictures just how big they are. When you go around there, you can't see them very well. You just see the corners of some of them. So with the proposals there and what they've done there, I'm happy to move the recommendation, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Levitt. Is there anybody who'd like to second that proposal? Councillor Ian Moody?
Yeah, I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Can I therefore go to the vote?
That motion has carried.
The next item is land adjacent to Dungarvan, Back Lane, Preston. Simon Ellis to present.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. The applicant has agreed, so I've got some updates, then I'll go through the slides, if I may. The applicant has agreed to submit a Section 106 unilateral undertaking, should members be minded to grant planning permission. And they've agreed to include the following elements. I'll read those out. First of all, for Parish School in Hitchin, secondary school expansion, 108,188. And that's all county elements are index linked to their particular method. So I need to mention that because they always they want to make sure that's mentioned. And then £12,180 towards special education needs provision, 1,084 towards library services in Hitchin Library, 2,051 towards Hitchin Young People Centre. And then the next element is a total of 59,495 contribution for parish council projects, but this money would be received by NHDC and then passed on to the parish council when those projects come to fruition. That's £20,000 towards new play equipment at Church Meadow and Recreation Ground playgrounds, £20,000 towards the expansion of the sports pavilion, and that could be match funded with some other funding, and then £5,000 towards improvements to various rights of way in the parish, and the remainder to be rewiring and refurbishing of the village hall. There's a concern that's been raised by a local resident about plans not showing a new dwelling under construction being developed off Gunnell's Green. This new dwelling under construction would not prejudice living conditions in the site or within the dwelling under construction, in my view. The relevant reference is 19/00977 FP. And if you look at paragraph 5.3.23 of the report, this matter's dealt with. And those amended plans that have been displayed do show that dwelling under construction. I'm also recommending an additional condition that's not on the report. I think some members may recall the planning permission for 3 dwellings on this site from January 2021, I think. And there's an oak tree near the entrance which needs to be protected. So I'm adding condition 18 recommended. Throughout the period of construction, the development hereby permitted and thereafter, the oak tree adjacent to the proposed site entrance shall be protected and retained in accordance with arboricultural best practice to the satisfaction of the local planning authority. And that's the reason in the interests of preservation of the tree, biodiversity and ecology. And can I have the slides, please? Have the next one. So there's the site layout. That's the site location plan. You can see Gunnell's Green to the south there, and then the access is off just next to cherry trees and near the primary school. Can I have the next slide, please? This is showing you the access, which is boarded off. That's the front boundary of the site, and you can see the tree that I refer to in that row of trees there. Can I have the next slide, please? This is taken from the front of the site from Dungarvan. Next one, please. That's from the east of the site. And the next one, please. That's the eastern boundary of the site. Next one, please. That's the northern boundary of the site. And the next one, that's the southern boundary. And then the next one, please, is the northern boundary. And now there should be some plans as well now. So this is a landscape plan. That's a proposed landscape plan. It's showing you the planting and the arrangements of landscaping and hard landscaping interacting with the development itself. Next one, please. Not sure what that is. That's the specification of the landscaping, I think. Next one, please. And you can see this plan. This is the site layout plan. You can see to the south of the site, it says approximate position of dwelling. That's the one I was referring to that's under construction. that was originally not shown on the plans. And just to emphasize the point here, it's not a legal requirement to accurately show off-site development on a plan. The only legal requirement the applicant has to show is the accurate position of proposed development within the red line. So it's not inappropriate to have an approximate position because that's not a legal requirement. The legal requirement is for the applicant to provide full details and full accurate drawings of what they're proposing on site. Next slide, please. These are street elevations. So this is showing you some street elevations internal. You can see that the hatch, the B, C, and D on that little key to the right. That's just showing you where those views would be seen. So they're just seeing some internal street scene elevations, and you can see the variety of housing proposed and the scale and form of those dwellings and the materials and the design. Next slide, please. And that's the location plan showing you there, Back Lane and then Dungarvan to the right, and primary school just to the left of the site. Just some key issues I'll pick up before concluding, Chair. I think it's worth having a look at paragraph 5.1.4. And that kind of sums it up really. At the moment, the site's in the rural area under the 1996 local plan. There's a new settlement boundary under the emerging local plan within which this site would be located. And the site's within a conservation area, and that's under both local plans. So the conservation area status would be retained, but the site flips from rural area beyond the Greenbelt to within the settlement boundary under the new local plan, which is essentially why members granted permission for the 3 much larger houses on this site before. So this principle of new residential development was accepted at that time, albeit this is clearly a much more intensive form of development that was approved then. Paragraph 5.4.30 sets out the position of the lead local flood authority. And as members will know from previous meetings, there are long delays securing their agreement to any proposals, and it takes a long time for developers to exchange information with the lead local flood authority to get them to agree things, and they're significantly understaffed. So what we are doing increasingly, and we've covered this before, is we are presenting planning applications to the planning committee, even though we don't have the secured agreement of the lead local flood authority, because the delays are getting untenable. So I recommend that permission be granted, subject to the removal of any objections from the lead local flood authority, subject to all necessary extensions to the statutory expiry date to secure that, and to the applicant submitting the unilateral undertaking containing the elements that I set out in the update to the beginning, Chair. So that's the changes to recommendation, additional condition, and the unilateral undertaking elements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Members, have you any questions, Mr. Ellis, at this time? No? Therefore, I will move on and invite Margaret Trinder to address the committee.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and councillors. I am Chairman of Preston Parish Council, and I am speaking on behalf of the Parish Council, the Neighbourhood Plan Steering Group and the Preston Trust. We realise that when assessing this application, members have to take account of the local situation regarding land supply, the emerging local plan, recent appeals, and the Planning Officer's report covering planning considerations. But we ask the committee to consider the following matters when making its decision. Preston residents are most concerned by the number and size of dwellings on this particular plot within the conservation area and the impact the increase in traffic will have on local lanes. Fewer dwellings would alleviate these issues. We note the Conservation Officer recommends a reduction in numbers, and while we appreciate that the council needs to increase its housing supply, this should not harm rural villages like Preston. We welcome the condition that materials for all external elevations are approved in advance by the local planning authority. It is important that these materials are chosen to reflect the local vernacular and historic core of the village, ensuring that the development does not detract from the appearance and character of the surrounding area. We do not agree that measures included in these proposals are adequate to meet North Hertfordshire's target of zero carbon emissions by 2030, especially as Hertfordshire's heatwave threshold has just been redefined. Further measures must be added so that the development becomes low carbon or carbon neutral. The letter from Smith-Jenkins to Ben Glover, dated the 17th of February, says, the applicant recognises the Parish Council's request for the use of grey water for flushing of WCs and wishes to point out that this is already an accepted sustainability principle referred to in the Energy Strategy Statement prepared by Briery Energy. We agree that this is an accepted sustainability principle, but page 19 of the Briery Energy document clearly indicates that grey water contribution is not applicable in this development. This is an unacceptable contradiction as well as being extremely short-sighted. Water is a scarce resource, and we all know that Hertfordshire has such low annual rainfall that it is on a par with Jerusalem and is classed as a semi-arid area. This is likely to be exacerbated by climate change. If grey water was used to flush toilets, the demand on mains water would be reduced. When the original application for 3 dwellings on this site was granted consent last year, this committee asked for a condition to investigate the feasibility of solar panels. The letter from Smith-Jenkins to the planning officer on the 2nd of December says that the applicant would be willing to accept a similar condition. However, no such condition has been included, but if it was appropriate a year ago, we believe it is appropriate now. Solar panels could be sensitively installed to protect the conservation area. We know that heat pumps will heat the homes efficiently and provide hot water, but solar panels could provide electricity for some of the other requirements and would go further towards reducing both carbon emissions and fuel bills for the householders. At the meeting of this committee on the 27th of January, members agreed to add conditions to look into the feasibility of solar panels and the use of grey water for another development in Preston. We ask that the same conditions be imposed on this application if planning consent is granted this evening. My next point would have been a condition for the oak tree, but I and everyone concerned will be pleased that it's already been added as a condition. We ask that conditions 3 and 5 on access and visibility should read prior to the commencement of development rather than prior to first occupation, to ensure that back lane remains safe for traffic and pedestrians as soon as work starts on the site. We also request a condition to be included to ensure the retention of all the grasscrete areas in the vicinity of the site for parking at Preston Primary School. Please take these comments into account to ensure that, if approved, this development is appropriate for the present and future residents of Preston. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Margaret, and wonderful timing. Members, have you any questions of clarification for the speaker? Well, your button's not working. It is now. Councillor David Levy.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Margaret. Just a quick, you mentioned the grasscrete areas where the school uses for parking. Whereabouts are they on this site or outside?
Site there, alongside, on one of the slides, there was the hoarding where the site would be. There's grasscrete along partially along there and on the other side of the road. And there is no part, obviously there never is any parking in primary schools, so the parents have to park to take the children into school, come back out and then drive off. So that happens twice a day.
Yeah, but they're actually outside the site.
They're outside the site, yes.
Okay, right, thank you.
But what we want with construction traffic, and if they were damaged, we would like to be sure that they were suitably repaired so that when the site is occupied, there's not going to be any issues with residents and parents parking at the primary school.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No. Can I therefore ask Councillor Claire Strong, Member Advocate, to address the committee?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for letting me come and speak to you on this particular application tonight. All members of the committee should have received in the last couple of days a letter from concerned residents. I hope you've had an opportunity to read that letter to you, and that's why I'm here really to represent those views. I mean, the Parish Council Chairman has talked about the additional planning concerns that she has and conditions that she'd like to see on the application. But the particular area I want to address is the one of density. And really it's to ask you to consider as a committee whether you think these revised plans will have a harmful effect on the character and appearance because it's of the much higher density that this new plan is going to have. I don't believe anybody, wants to see this site undeveloped going forward because it is within the village boundary. However, the planning permission that was granted for the 3 housing, those 3, although large dwellings, were quite in keeping. And I think that was perhaps, you saw that when you saw the map of the site, that the properties around it are very spaced and it's not a very high density area. This particular development, it's changing from 3 dwellings to now 10. And the mix of housing has gone from a 5-bedroom and 2 4s to 2 5-bedrooms, 3 4s, 4 3-bedrooms and 1 2-bedrooms. So that's actually an increase from 13 bedrooms to now 36 bedrooms. So I think you can start to think about the scale of what that is in terms of density. You also think about, it was mentioned about car trafficking. Most houses normally have the 2 principals in the house each have a car. So that would have been 6 houses. With 10, that's now 20. And you saw pictures of the lane. It's not a very wide lane, and there's obviously a lot of traffic and congestion on it that is from the school. Within the report that you have, there is a report that comes from the Senior Conservation Officer. And although it's in the report as saying no objection, if you have actually gone through and read that report, you will know that the Conservation Officer did have quite a few concerns about the change on the mix. In his view, he felt that it would have a harmful impact on the character and appearance of this part of the area. On the 3 number of homes, again, that was sympathetic to the character of this part of Preston. But this site is towards the outskirts. It's not built up within the centre of the village. And in his view, he felt that these homes being squeezed in. Now, the planning officer wrote his report does say that, this site, it is, and as you saw, it is quite well screened, as though that's an acceptable way to hide away that there is a much more dense development behind the screening. But when you look at the design and what the conservation officer was actually suggesting was that the 4 houses along at I don't know whether it's north, south, east or west, Mr. Ellis would have to tell me my directions, but of those 4 houses, he was suggesting removing 1 of those. And of 2 of the houses, perhaps rather than seeing them, because there's not much space between them, rather than seeing them as 2 detached dwellings, perhaps having them as 2 semi-detached dwellings. Again, that would reduce the bulk and density within that site. So those really are, I think, are the concerns, again, that residents have brought forward. But also when you look at the comments from the Neighbourhood Parish Working Party group, again, their view was that this would have an adverse effect, and asked again also that the numbers should be reduced. And also because of the policies that they have in the village, this is now adding to the number of 5 bedrooms, and it's not in keeping with the plans that they have for their villages, where they want to support the principle of having much more mixed housing, which is housing that is actually in need for the village. So the number of the policies that are laid out in the Preston Parish Neighbourhood Plan have not been adhered to. And it's a concern, I think, for a lot of us that do see where there are neighbourhood plans that villages have put together and submitted to the planning authority, is that we would then like to see developers, when they read those neighbourhood plans, to actually comply with them. And then particularly when officers and members of this committee also see the plans coming through, that they do actually take
Can I
into
remind
account.
you, Councillor, you've got half a minute.
Thank you so much, Councillor Rice. So I will conclude and say, please really look at that plan in the detail that's attached and really think about whether or not you think this is an enhancement to the village or whether it is overdevelopment, and perhaps ask whether or not there is a way around of either asking to go back, defer it and go back and see if the developer would be inclined to remove one of the houses and perhaps make a modification, and just perhaps making it something that's a little bit more in keeping in this semi-rural area of the village. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I now ask Ben Porthwick to address the committee? Yes.
Chair, members, thank you.
Has anybody got?
Oh, sorry.
Has anybody got any questions of clarification for the last speaker? You see, I guess that was going to happen. Right. Can I ask Ben Borthwick to address the committee, please?
Chair, members, thank you. I'm Ben Borthwick, Smith Jenkins Town Planning Consultants, acting on behalf of the applicant, supporting this application. As set out in your officer's report, the application seeks full planning permission for 10 detached dwellings with garages and creation of a new vehicular access off Back Lane. The scheme is in the context of the principle of residential use of the site has been established by the existing planning permission for 3 large dwellings, which was approved in February 2021. We fully support your officer's recommendation to approve the application subject to the conditions set out in the report. And I'd also like to mention very quickly, the suggested conditions are my client would be in agreement with a condition relating to feasibility of grey water and solar panels. I think the other point that was raised was maintenance of grasscrete outside the site. That may be difficult to condition, but if it could be a payment to the Highways Authority for maintenance, that may be a solution there. I'd like to emphasise very quickly the scheme's key planning benefits. The applicant recognises the site potentially provides the last remaining opportunity to deliver sustainable and suitable housing in the village, in the local village context, given the emerging plan proposes that land surrounding Preston will be designated as Greenbelt, which will protect against inappropriate development of the wider area. The proposal makes effective use of land to meet the need for new houses, providing much needed new housing, a net gain of 7 units from the previously approved scheme. In the context that the council is currently unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. The development responds positively, in our view, to the requirements of policy HD3 of the neighbourhood plan and policy HS3 of the emerging local plan, in that the scheme sits within the settlement boundary of Preston and provides an appropriate density of development reflecting its locality. By example of density, Back Lane itself has a density of 12.97 dwellings per hectare. The higher densities have been approved locally. 21 houses were approved at land west of Castlefield, which have a density of 19.6 dwellings per hectare. And this proposal is 10.2 dwellings per hectare. The proposal provides a mixed use of dwelling sizes, with larger dwellings on significant size plots in the context of the existing planning permission, which did not reflect local need for 2- and 3-bedroom houses. There's no increase in this proposal in terms of 5-bed houses. The scheme responds positively to the site's local context and maintains and contributes to the local character of Preston. Your officers are in agreement that the scheme overall, in terms of layout and design, including density, would not result in an acceptable harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area. The scheme's sustainability credentials adhere to policy HD5 of the neighbourhood plan policy requirements, and the proposal includes a 50.25% reduction over building regulations energy requirements, incorporating rainwater harvesting and grey water WC flushing. Electric vehicle charging points were provided for each dwelling, as well as ground source heat pumps. As I've just mentioned, the applicant will be willing to to entertain a condition to discuss the feasibility of solar panels as well. The scheme will protect the amenities of existing neighbouring residents living adjacent to the site. It will also provide acceptable standards of living environment for future residents for new houses in terms of habitable room sizes, outlook, daylight and garden sizes. The proposal will result in a biodiversity net gain within the site. This will be secured through a landscape and ecological management plan, which will be approved by condition. The development is acceptable from highways and parking perspective, and the proposal relocates the access along the site along Back Lane to a location that's further away from the protected tree, which was discussed earlier, which was part of the approved scheme. The applicants provide additional technical information to address the lead local flood authority's comments regarding proposed site drainage. The extant scheme or the existing approval doesn't include Section 106 contributions because it's below threshold. However, in line with the new application for 10 dwellings,
You have 45 seconds.
the applicant has agreed to meet County Council and Parish Council requirements. To conclude, overall, the proposal complies with relevant policies in the local plan, neighbourhood plan and emerging local plan. I would therefore urge members to endorse your officer's recommendation and to resolve to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Members, have you any questions or clarification? Councillor Tom Tyson.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Borthwick, as you mentioned the figures on the density of the dwellings per hectare, I think that I just wanted to ask if you can confirm what I think was something that you submitted in one of the statements, which was that you pointed out that there are 19 houses on Back Lane at a density of 12.97 houses per hectare, which is, you just confirmed that, and that your proposal is for 10.02 houses per hectare. Therefore, the density would be considerably less, in your opinion. But actually, if on closer inspection, if we look at Back Lane, we find that of those 19 houses, 8 of them are little terraced cottages. And I think that the fact that you're counting dwellings and not, the actual size of the footprint of those dwellings is actually distorting the sum a little bit. And if you considered that those terraced cottages maybe had the same footprint as 2 larger houses and then recalculated, would you not find that the density of dwellings per hectare on your site was probably about somewhat greater, in fact, than the rest of Back Lane if we disregard all of those terrace houses or account for them as maybe 2 large houses? So is your maths actually somewhat sort of misleading about the density?
Will I respond? I mean, density per hectare is what it is. I haven't changed the figures to help. It is numbers of dwellings in a hectare, and factually that is the case. But if your view is there are other means of assessing built development density, then I can't give you alternative figures. These figures are accurate in terms of dwelling per hectare.
Any further questions? Can I ask Simon Ellis to respond? And can I ask him about the additional conditions that it now appears that we're talking about? Reference the use of grey water, solar panels. I noticed EV charging is in the informative anyway. Would you like to comment, please, Mr. Ellis?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few points to come back on there. First of all, I think it's just important to bring out the Conservation Officer's role and his comments. And if you look at the final 2 sentences of his comments, he says, "I consider that the degree of harm of the development as proposed, not as redesigned by his suggestions in his preceding paragraphs, I consider the degree of harm would be towards the mid to lower end of the less than substantial harm continuum." What does he mean by that? And he says, "I leave that to the case officer to assess the proposal against paragraph 202 of the MPPF." So paragraph 202 of the MPPF says that when you're looking at harm to the conservation area, where that harm is less than substantial, you've got to weigh that against the public benefits of development. And the public benefits of the development, when you have a 1.4-year land supply and proposal is for 10 dwellings, those public benefits are quite considerable. So the conservation officer doesn't make that assessment. He leaves that to the case officer and myself in this report. So the recommendation is that the public benefits weighed against the less substantial harm, then that means it trips back to the presumption in favour of sustainable development, unfortunately. And the presumption in favour of sustainable development in paragraph 14 of the NPPF does also capture neighbourhood plan policies. So when you're looking at neighbourhood plan policies and the old local plan policies, you have to apply the presumption in favour of sustainable development, which what that essentially means is if you're going to refuse planning permission and succeed at appeal, you'll need to demonstrate that any harm that you identify or articulate in terms of density or things that you're concerned about that might be concerns about the conservation area issues, you'd have to make that harm would have to be significant and demonstrable and significantly and demonstrable and outweigh the benefits of delivering new homes. So I think that cutting edge point is where you are with this decision. The idea that you can redesign it and let's just make it slightly looser. Well, no, you've got a proposal in front of you and you either approve it or you don't approve it. But if you don't approve it, the appeal decision will be based around that analysis of public benefits against harm, presumption in favour of sustainable development, and that will unfortunately capture the neighbourhood plans. I appreciate a lot of effort goes into these neighbourhood plans, but when the council's 5-year land supply is 1.4 years, that factor effectively trips into the equation, I'm afraid, at every single turn. You'll see it repeatedly in appeal decisions. We're getting it all the time. Inspectors will be looking at it ruthlessly, applying the presumption in favour of sustainable development. And if they can't find significant or demonstrable harm that outweighs those benefits, they're going to allow the appeals. So you're in that context, I'm afraid. And that's why the recommendation is what it is. And that's why the conservation officer's advice has not been disregarded. It's been put in its correct context, which is he isn't giving a judgment on public benefits. He's giving his specialist conservation advice. And he clearly says at the end of it, I leave that to the case officer to judge. So that's not his role. So that's just explain why there's this apparent paradoxical contradiction between his advice and the officer recommendation. So turning to the substantive matters then. Yeah, I agree with the point that the speaker made on behalf of the developer. It's difficult to condition the retention of the grass creep, but I was just having a quick look at recommended condition 6, which is the construction management plan. And I think the parish were more concerned about harm caused to that area during construction. And there's point I of that condition says post-construction restoration, reinstatement of working areas and temporary access to public highways. You could probably stretch that to include and areas immediately outside the site, including the grass creep outside. I mean, it's marginally enforceable because it's outside the site, but I think you could probably include that. And then it would be for the developer to make sure that if there's any damage to that grass creep area during the construction period, then that could be captured by that element of the condition. And on the grey water and the solar panels, the applicant's admitted today he's quite happy to accept that. So we can repeat the conditions that we used in the previous permission for the 3 houses, which contain all the feasibility studies around grey water and solar panels, for example. Those can be added quite clearly. And then the other parish council concern was about conditions 3 and 5 and the trigger for the access. I'm not sure about that idea because, of course, the access doesn't come into use properly until the development's occupied. I do appreciate that they're saying during construction, but if you had it prior to commencement, then you're making the development do all the highway works before they do anything. If I would guard against that, but if you were minded to go down that route, you could perhaps have a separate condition that says phasing of development to be agreed in advance to include implementation of access and things like that. That's a possibility, but I wouldn't change the wording of those conditions because they're specifically worded by the Highway Authority as well. So those are my comments, Chair, in response to the speakers.
Have members got any Further questions at all for Mr. Ellis? No, in that case, can I invite you to debate this, members? Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. I want to pick up on a couple of points within there. First was the bit about the grasscrete and everything, which the speaker brought up, and Mr. Rose has pointed out, and I actually had the same thing up. 6I could probably cover it. I think the grasscrete from description is actually in the verge, which forms part of the public highway. So I think 6I would probably cover that as a condition anyway, and be enforceable. So I think I'd agree with that as an extra condition on there. The other bits that came up was mainly around housing need and density. Now, the report doesn't actually have any input from our housing officer to say what the housing need is in that area and if that mix is conforms with it. But it does seem to be a reasonable mix to me, which brings us on to the density. Now, the problem we have here, we don't have the 5-year land supply. We've got principal development established on here. We're nowhere near our figures. And I think if we refuse this, we're going to probably lose it at appeal if we went to appeal on it on those very grounds. Absolutely. In fact, I'm absolutely certain we would, because it's not Greenbelt. So I'm absolutely certain we'd lose it on appeal. And by doing that, it makes me worry about some of these conditions that don't have to be in there, but the developer's willing to accept about solar panels and that. And we have a record of appeals, as we've seen earlier, of the inspector removing all the good bits that help, particularly things like 106. So I'd be very, very wary of it. And I think Councillor Tyson actually raised a point about densities on that little terrace of 8 houses, I think it is there, about ignoring it. Actually, I think that had bounced back on us, because when you look at the site, if you went to appeal, and that's roughly a hectare site with a fairly low density. If it went to appeal, you could cite other densities on other sites close by. And if you cited that particular one at appeal as a developer, you could actually say, well, there's a site with housing on there very close by that has a density of 36 dwellings per hectare, which is what I've roughly worked out on that. So I think we're between a rock and a hard place here. I think it is quite a dense site, but the housing need does exist. We can't meet it elsewhere at the moment because we haven't got a local plan through yet. So on balance, I think I'm going to move the recommendation, Chair, and see what response we get to that, with those additional conditions, of course.
The grasscrete that you're trying to sneak into the recommendations, did you say, Mr. Ellis, that we could put it in if we put it in as phasing of the development?
Sorry, Chair, on the grasscrete point, I was looking at the, the condition on construction management that Councillor Levitt referred to. There's that little section in there, I, which just talks about reinstating and upgrading areas that may have been damaged during construction. I think you could just extend that just to say areas immediately outside the site on the public highway, including grasscrete. So if you put that explicitly in there, then the developer would know that if they do damage the grasscrete area, they'd need to do so. The phasing condition I was referring to, Chair, was only if you were minded to address the point that the parish council made about conditions 3 and 5. And I'm not recommending that you change 3 and 5, but if you were minded to do so, I wouldn't go as far as saying prior to commencement of development. I would just sort of take out the trigger point and put in a separate condition on phasing of construction and timing of the access to be agreed, so that it's slightly looser than their approach. And then, of course, there's the other conditions that we've already discussed that you could add in, which is the grey water and the solar panel's feasibility that the applicants agreed to accept as well this evening. So, but those are on the earlier decisions. I can just lift them off and put them on if you were minded to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Ernest. Councillor Hewson.
Second, Chair.
Just a second. Right, we have. That was you, wasn't it? Yeah. We have. A proposer. We have a seconder. So can I take it to the vote, please? Of course, that was including extra conditions.
That motion is carried.
If members would like a break, this would be a good time to take a break for 5 minutes. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, members, we'll continue. Item 10, land rear and adjacent to 60 Ashwell Road, Bygrave. Simon Ellis, please to report.
Thanks, Chair. I've got two updates and then I'll go through the slides. First update is just a correction report. This application has been called into committee by Councillor Steve Jarvis for similar reasons on location development outside settlements and wanting the matter to be debated at committee. That's a corrections report which refers to Councillor Tom Tyson. Apologies for that. I'm also wanting to add an additional condition, and I'll just read that out to the recommendation, if I may, Chair. This has been agreed with the applicant. Before the dwelling hereby permitted is first occupied, the existing vehicle access driveway shall be surfaced in a permeable but non-loose material, such as blacktop permeable resin surface or black paving, for the first 17.5 metres when measured from the point where the vehicle access road meets the public highway and thereafter be retained in perpetuity. Reason, in the interest of protecting the residential amenity of the existing dwelling at 60 Ashwell Road. So it's just for a noise and to avoid.
Before we,
sorry, Chair.
Sorry, before you continue, I believe Councillor Tom Tyson would like to say something.
If I may, can I just say that I want to declare a personal interest, and so as I live not far from the application site, and therefore I will now leave the room.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. I'm speeding ahead.
Sorry, would you like to continue?
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I've just read out that additional condition that I'd like to add, and then I'll now go through the slides, if I may. So that shows you the 60 Ashwell Road, and then the road to the side of it, and then the building at the back. That's the building proposed to be converted into a dwelling. And then that condition I referred to would be the first 17.5 metres of that access track to make sure that it's a permeable but non-loose material, because it's quite close to that house. Can I have the next slide, please? So that's showing you the building as it exists. So quintuple, is that garage? That's right, isn't it? Quadruple or something. Quadruple, that's it. Quintuple's 5, isn't it? Okay, so quadruple garage, and that's the existing building. Can I have the next slide, please? And that's showing the conversion to the dwelling proposed. You can see using the frame of the existing building and just converting it internally into a dwelling with roof lights. Next slide, please. And that's showing you the location of the dwelling, which is already there on where the existing building is. And then the car parking space is just near the building there, next to each other. Next slide, please. That shows you a photograph of the access with the loose material, talking about getting that resurfaced. And that's what that condition's about. Can I have that next slide then? That shows you the building from the road just over the hedge with the fencing behind in front. And the next one, please. And that's the side of 60 Ashwell Road. So that's showing you that if you have that new material that we are proposing in the condition, then you're not going to have harm to the residential amenity of that dwelling. In terms of principles, Chair, the site's within the Greenbelt, but as is explained in paragraph 4.3.3, as this proposal is for the reuse of an existing building. This is not, in our view, inappropriate development under the National Planning Policy Framework approach to protecting Greenbelt land. It doesn't harm the openness of the Greenbelt because you're not talking about any new buildings or any encroachment into open countryside. On sustainability, please look at paragraph 4.3.2, where the case officer sets out a balanced view. Members will note, but it's not reported here, that we've had a recent appeal decision where a new dwelling has been allowed in a place called Nup End, where the house was a lot more isolated than this one. And the inspector, again, unfortunately, similar to the last item, said our chronic undersupply of housing is so acute that he wasn't even bothered about the relative isolation of the site and its lack of access to services and reliance on the private car, and said that your demonstrable undelivery of housing doesn't even override, must override even concerns in relation to that. So I'm afraid we're on a bit of hiding to nothing with even those issues now as well on our 5-year supply. And unless you can demonstrate significant and demonstrable harm, then as it complies with Greenbelt policy, then I don't think anyone would succeed on appeal in refusing this development, Chair. Thank you.
Members, have you got any questions for Mr. Ellis at this time? Councillor Mantle.
Thank you. Does the plan as submitted include adequate storage? Particularly, I'm thinking of things like mobility scooters, push chairs.
Chair, do you want me to answer that? I'd say not specifically, Councillor Mantle, because it's quite a bespoke design, isn't it? Using the frame of the existing building. And if you were to think of things like bike stores and things like that, you'd be needing new buildings, and then you're in the Greenbelt. So it gets a bit tricky to have those facilities. So no, I would say, in terms of your concern that I know you've raised on a number of occasions, I would say that it doesn't really include that. But then, of course, it's a dwelling, and people will be able to store things in their own internal domestic space as the way they see fit.
Can I invite Philip Hills to address the committee? Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Chairman and planning councillors. I'm Philip Hills and I live with Jackie at 60 Ashwell Road. A brief history. Number 60 was purchased circa 2000 and was modernised and improved, including permission to build a double garage. In 2002, the garage permission was subject of a variation to make it into a quadruple garage. I'm sure that NHDC gave these permissions to provide additional enjoyment to number 60, not as a future opportunist new build home. This application has now reversed this enjoyment completely to the detriment of number 60. At the time of sale to us, it was understood that the garage was to be used for the developer's hobby and enjoyment of cars. Soon became clear that this was not going to be the case and was used as a builder's yard and store, which it still is. 16 years on, the first I heard that this building was to be transformed to a 3-bed family house was after the planning permission was made. No approach made to me by the developer or his agent before this time. It should also be noted that neither my immediate neighbours nor I received any notification from NHDC. The only notification was a sign on the blind side of the telegraph pole outside number 60. There are no other dwellings in Upper Bygrave, the original village, that has no separate ownership dwelling at the rear of an existing property, and this should remain to retain the existing character of the village. The proposed new dwelling is only 73 feet, 22 metres from the back wall of my property, and only 13 feet, 4 metres from my rear garden boundary. Services, the proposal has no separate services. The existing electric, water and drainage all coming from the mains in our dwelling, number 60, which for the little was used to be neighbourly was not an issue. To install new down a drive, the majority of which is adjacent to our property, the length of a total of 148 feet, 47 metres, of which 75 feet 22 metres is alongside all the side windows to our property, would arguably be horrendous and an unacceptable disruption to us and our neighbours. Access. The report states that the traffic past my dwelling will not change. Untrue. We have lived with and accepted an average 1 visit per day over 16 years. With this proposal, this will increase dramatically. For a 3-bed family house, traffic is likely to be 3 cars, each with a return journey minimum daily. There may be visitors, post, deliveries, milk, service vehicles. May I also add that number 60 sits down from the drive approximately 225 millimetres. Visually, this makes vehicles appear considerably higher against our property. In addition, there will be constant construction traffic for months, which will include skip and delivery lorries. May I highlight that a skip lorry virtually skims the front side of our property and is immediately adjacent to our side windows. There needs to be consideration of the high-speed vehicles travel along the Ashwell Road beyond the curtilage of number 60. Herts County Council are very aware of the concern already raised by occupiers of Ashwell Road. For skip lorries and delivery trucks, they will either have to reverse down the drive or reverse onto the road. There is no turning circle available for this size of vehicle. Should also be noted that the back door to walk onto the drive is a blind corner, as indeed from our parking area. Mr. and Mrs. Lang, number 57, and Mr. and Mrs. Boxall, number 59, who live immediately opposite number 60, have requested that I highlight that any additional traffic, whatever form this may take, will severely impact them by entering and exit the drive, possibly street parking opposite their drive, and in winter, lights reflecting in their windows, which they consider totally inappropriate and unacceptable. Mr. and Mrs. Lang, number 57, have lodged an official objection to this application. They asked me again to state that what stands at present as an innocuous, almost unused farm-style building on conversion to a 3-bedroom family house will be in full view from every single front window of their house, also totally unacceptable to them. Mr. and Mrs. Northern, who live opposite the proposed dwelling, have requested that I highlight on their behalf that the proposed property will look directly at their home. Number 60 does not. It looks across the land adjacent. Environmental impact, noise. There will obviously be additional noise pollution when we're in our garden, certainly through construction during the summer months and final usage. Light, there will be additional light pollution in final usage, particularly.
Can I remind you, got half a minute, please.
For Mr. and Mrs. Northern. And privacy and security. 2 of the most important aspects for us at number 60 are the privacy and security that we both hold sacrosanct. At present, the only key holders to the front entrance gate are the occupiers of number 60 and the owner of the quadruple garage. This will obviously change with the occupiers of a 3-bed family house. Thank you for the opportunity of allowing me to give clarification to this application.
Thank you, sir. Members, have you any questions for Mr. Hills? Councillor Levitt.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm rather puzzled about the access to your property and this one behind you. You mentioned just then it's gated one with keys that you both have keys for. Whose ownership does that? I'm assuming from looking at the aerial photo, that's the only way into your property and the only way into this one. Whose ownership does it fall in with, and how does that affect access?
Good evening, Councillor Levitt. Yes, that is the only access to the two properties. I have shared access up to my rear door. We've got a 5-bar gate that goes across that drive, which for security for both the garage at the bottom and indeed our own home security, we have a high level security padlock on, and so there are only 2 keys.
Ownership, is that gate and that bit in?
Pass. Both of ours.
We got a plan, Mr. Ellis, which shows that.
Sorry, Chair. You're talking about the ownership of the access.
Does the access cause problems with access to the other dwelling by accessing one? Is really the question. Are you, if we approve this, are you still able to access number 60?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
Okay.
right, sorry.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Hills? Okay, in that case, can I invite Councillor Steve Jarvis, Member Advocate, to address the committee?
Thank you very much, Chair. So this is an application to create a new dwelling from a domestic garage located in the Greenbelt. And it seems to me that if one is prepared to accept the condition, to accept the conversion of any domestic garage in the Greenbelt to an additional dwelling, that could result in a substantial number of additional dwellings in the Greenbelt. And it seems to me that that's not entirely what the intention of that part of the NPPF is. I think there are two other issues that I would like to raise. The first is we've heard Mr. Hill speak about the issues surrounding the access. And the photograph that we saw taken down the drive illustrates just what a small gap there is along the side of number 60, and how that really doesn't represent a satisfactory access to a separate dwelling. Now, clearly, the condition requiring a hard surface on the drive will reduce the noise impact from vehicles, but it won't reduce their impact in any other way. The other issue that concerns me is the principle about creating an additional dwelling in the village of Bygrave in this way. Now, Bygrave is a Category C village in the emerging local plan, which sets out that we should only be allowing limited affordable housing or community or facilities for local community needs. And an additional dwelling in this location doesn't fit either of those categories. Now, we're told that Baldock's isolation and sustainability is not an issue. I mean, I guess that seems tantamount to saying that the local plans got it wrong and shouldn't have put Bygrave in Category 3, which is perhaps a little odd. But it sets out that there is a bus stop at the end of the drive. What it doesn't tell you is there's only one bus a day. You can go to Letchworth and come back, and you can come from Royston, but you can't go there. So it's difficult to argue that the presence of a bus stop at the end of the drive is a significant benefit. We're told it's only 3 kilometres from Baldock, and indeed it probably is, but it's 3 kilometres along an unlit road with no footpath. It's quite clear that this is a location that is only livable in by someone who accesses the site by car. So the sustainability of the location is questionable, and that I think is why the local plan, the emerging local plan, put Bygrave in the category in which it did. Now we're told that previous similar application in Bygrave was rejected last year, but there has been a change in the position on land supply. Now, it seems to me that one of the things there's been very little change on is the local plan position since the middle of last year. We'd all wish it was otherwise, but it hasn't changed. So it seems to me that to argue that it was sustainable to refuse what I understand was a conversion in Bygrave last year, but it isn't this year, I think is a little difficult to understand. So I think that to allow this application would set an unfortunate precedent in terms of development in Category C villages in the Greenbelt. And unlike some of the issues you've dealt with earlier in the meeting, where the position with land supply substantially reduced the council's room for discretion, this location is in the Greenbelt. And that does make a significant difference because the NPPF takes a different view about the presumption in favour of sustainable development for sites that are in the Greenbelt. So I think for those reasons, that I would suggest that this is not an application that the committee should be approving. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jarvis. Members, have you any questions of Councillor Jarvis? Okay, can I invite therefore Samantha Boyd to address the committee?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Samantha Boyd. I'm a planning consultant speaking on behalf of the applicant, Mr. MacGyver. We were unsure whether we could attend committee this evening. Therefore, we responded to the Parish Council and the neighbour objections in our letter of the 23rd of March, which was forwarded to all members of the Planning Committee to read in advance of the meeting. I did make it here. So I just wanted to summarise a couple of points in the response. In regard to Greenbelt issues, the proposal is compliant with the development plan, adopted and emerging policies, and the NPPF, a view that is shared by your officers. In regard to the sustainability of the application site, Bygrave is a small village, but this council has accepted Bygrave is suitable for new development when they recently granted permission for 3 new houses at Downs Barnes, just 100 metres south of the application site. There are no planning reasons to treat this application any differently. We acknowledge the concerns of neighbours. However, your officers have assessed the proposal and consider it to be acceptable. The fact remains the garage has existed for 20 years and the applicant's vehicles have been coming and going to the site during that time without restriction or complaint. This is a material consideration. It's also noted that the Highways Department have no objections to the use of the access. Just in terms of Mr. Hill's comments, there's obviously disruption. It's inevitable when there's new development, but it's not a reason to refuse planning permissions, as I'm sure you've come across that issue before when you've made your decisions on applications. It's also not the intention of a developer. That's not really a planning consideration, especially when it's, you know, the applicant is entitled to submit a planning application for a building that he's had over a number of years. And just to confirm the ownership of the access, the whole of the access is in the ownership of the applicant, but number 60 has a legal right of way to come through the access gate and access the front of their property where they park. We fully agree with the officer's assessment of the proposal, and as confirmed earlier, the applicant has agreed to recommended conditions. In our view, planning permission should be granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Members, have you any questions of clarification? Okay. Is there anything you'd like to say, Mr. Ellis? Reference points raised.
Just thank you, Chair. Just if I may, just to respond to Councillor Jarvis's point, and I wasn't saying that location and sustainability is thrown out the window. I'm saying that we are in a situation where we have to apply the presumption in favour of sustainable development, and unfortunately, the inspectorate are taking a view that our land supply is so poor that every time we throw anything at the inspector and it's marginal on whether or not it's sustainable, they just look at it in the round and they say, no, your land supply is so critical that the location of this development, even though it's not great in terms of access to services, is not significant and demonstrable harm that outweighs the benefits of delivering new homes. That's the test, unfortunately, and you're going to come up against that all the time until we start to recover our land supply position and adopt a plan and start to move ahead. Little sites like this are going to get granted development, and I just, that's our professional view. We can't sit here and pretend that wouldn't happen at appeal. So that's my view, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Members, would you like to debate? Councillor Levitt?
I'll kick off, put something into the mix. Councillor Jarvis mentioned about compliance with the NPPF, etc. It is a weird infill site and it is in the Greenbelt, but Mr. Ellis has pointed out some of the reasons that it is difficult to refuse. I was looking at the NPPF section 12, paragraph 127, which says, it's got lots of bits in there, but the ones that are probably applicable. Planning policies and decisions should ensure that developments, A, will function well and add to the overall quality of the area, not just for the short term, but for the lifetime of the development. C, as sympathetic to local character and history and surrounding built environment and landscape setting. And the other one I'd pick out was F, create places that are safe, inclusive and accessible and which promote health and well-being with a high standard of amenity for existing and future users where crime and disorder, etc., etc. My question on this one as a thought is, does this in particular create a high standard of amenity for existing and future users? It's quite a big building on a very small site in a substantially rural area. It doesn't appear to have much in the way of outdoor space at all, from what I can see in the plans and the photographs of it. So a very cramped site with a difficult access and doesn't really fit in with the current design of the area. It's a thought. I'm not saying it's a ground for refusal as such at the moment. I'm open to anybody else to sort of pick up on that. But is it something that could be taken into account?
Any other member like to comment? Councillor Ian Mantle.
Thank you. I was looking at this again. Am I right that there is no garden for this?
Chair, yeah, there's very small amenity area around it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not a garden.
Not in the traditional sense.
My
no.
concern is the amenity and the living conditions for the people in the new property. I'm really concerned that if we grant this, we're granting a substandard quality development. And I'm really not convinced that this is an appropriate building to be converted or to be used as a separate dwelling. I feel that it is very much an outbuilding for number 60 rather than a building in its own right. And I think this is another one of these sort of inappropriate shoehornings that we do get sometimes. And I'm not at all happy with this one.
Do I have any recommendations? Do I have a proposer either to accept or refuse? Councillor Simon Bloxham.
I'd like to propose acceptance of the recommendation from the planning officer. Thank you.
I have a proposer. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mike Hewson.
Thank you, Chair. Would it be possible to look at the access photos again? I think they were showed during the slides.
Mr. Ellis, could we?
Yeah, sure. I haven't got access to the.
Darryl, can you put the slides up again, please?
And could you, Simon, sorry, could you just go through again what the changes are going to be to that for the access? Is it just the surface?
Yeah, that's right. It's the surface condition that for the first 17.5 meters, so that it's porous but non-loose material.
Mm-hmm. I think there was another photo where we could see the windows. There's another one, maybe. No, okay. Okay, it's that one. Yeah, that looks quite small for diggers and trucks and stuff like that. I'm not convinced, but it seems that the applicant owns that, so they can kind of do what they want with it. not sure where I'm going to land on this, to be honest. I'd welcome more debate.
Well, I have a proposer. Simon Bloxham proposed.
Yes, am I all right to speak?
You are very
on this.
well.
Thank you. I think what we're looking at here is an unfortunate set of circumstances that the owner of number 60 is going to have further vehicle movements using that driveway. But unfortunately, we are where we are. I think talking about a lack of garden, yes, might be a thought, but that's really to the person who would then purchase the property if it's given permission and gets built. I really would like to remind people what our planning officer is saying, Simon Ellis is saying, that we have no reasonable reason to not grant permission for this development. Thank you.
Councillor Morgan Derbyshire.
I will happy to second Councillor Bloxham's proposal.
Okay, we have a proposer and a seconder. Can I therefore go to the vote?
That motion has carried.
Yeah. Councillor Strong, could you do me a favour? Could you get Councillor Tyson back in? Are you going? It's all right, don't worry. Yeah. That's the problem. Welcome back, Councillor Tyson. I'll move on to item 11. Simon Ellis to present the planning appeals report.
No updates, Chair. I'll take any questions on appeals.
Do we have any questions on appeals? No, so therefore the report is for noting. Current enforcement notices, Simon Ellis to present. You got it in the wrong order here. I propose that under section 100.
So the part 1 report, Chair, there is a part 1 report, but so yeah, the first part is in the public domain. So that table on paragraph page 119, is it?
Oh, that's good. That's right.
Because that's a list of enforcement notices served. So that's all in the public domain.
Right, so the current enforcement notices that are in part 1 of the report. Has anybody got any questions on them? Okay, therefore that report is for noting. Now, to exclusion of press and public, I propose that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the following report will involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 5 and 7 of part 1 of Schedule 12 of the said Act as amended. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Derbyshire. Can we go to the vote?
The motion has carried.
Thank you. I will now move the meeting into part 2 and await committee services to confirm before continuing. Welcome back, everybody. I now close this meeting at 9:47. Thank you very much, members, and stay safe on the way home.